Alright, welcome to a brand new episode of the Metal Matt Podcast. As always, I'm your host, Metal Matt. And today we're going to be looking at some thrash metal. We've been doing the big four on the show in the past. In the past we did Metallica, then we did Slayer. Now we're halfway done. The third in this trilogy, I guess, is Megadeth. Yes, Megadeth. We're going to be doing that today. They just had a brand new album drop today, so that's why we're doing it. And next month we're actually going to be doing Anthrax Retrospective, so we'll be doing so we'll have done all the big four bands on the show, so that'll be cool. But we're going to be doing some Megadeth, and it'll be awesome. So first of all, before we do that, let's go to some shout-outs. First of all, Chucky's Playground, great place to be. If you haven't signed up yet, definitely check it out. It's just a really great place to be for all your Chucky needs, non-Chucky needs, whatever you want to talk about, you can talk about there. And Movie Man with Spanky and G, really cool podcast. If you haven't checked it out, definitely check it out. I'll post the link to their channel in the description. It's a really cool podcast, just really entertaining stuff. Definitely check it out. And so now we will be checking out Megadeth, doing a Megadeth retrospective. And much like a lot of other artists that I love, the way I discovered Megadeth was, you guessed it, Guitar Hero. The first song I ever really heard by them was Hangar 18 off of Rest in Peace, which we'll talk about later on, but I really liked that song. It was a really difficult song to play on Guitar Hero too, but yeah. And then the next song I heard by them was Symphony of Destruction, and I actually first heard it. I was watching VH1 Classic, and they would do Metal Mania, which I do think they still do, which is a show where they broadcast heavy metal videos, mainly from the 80s. Some of them came from the early 90s, but they don't do that a lot, honestly. It's mostly 80s videos, but every once in a while they would show 90s videos. And they ended up showing Symphony of Destruction, the Symphony of Destruction video, right after Metallica's One, which I thought was kind of funny. But, yeah, it was a really cool music video, and those two songs in particular really hooked me onto Megadeth. And I loved them ever since. So, with that said, let's go ahead and take a look at their very first album, Killing Is My Business, and Business Is Good. And looking at the cover right now, and I'm showing you the first cover now, the original cover, and that is an ugly cover. It's just so terrible. The original concept was that Mustaine wanted to showcase the mascot, Vic Rattlehead, on it, but the original sketches got lost or something like that, and the record company ended up just creating this really low budget kind of set and stuff like that, low budget cover, and the band hated it, and I hate it too. It's really horrible, just awful. And they ended up doing a completely new cover around. I'm not sure when exactly it was re-released, but they did a re-release of the album. I want to say 2002, maybe. I don't know, but it was definitely early 2000s. I know that for sure. And they did a brand new cover, and I'll show you that right now. And it looks a hell of a lot better than the original. Not the greatest thing by any means, but it's definitely better than what it was. So that's the album art for you. And this is Megadeth's debut album. And, it's kind of what you would think a debut Megadeth album would sound like. It's pretty raw. The production is pretty raw. And the band was actually given $8,000 from the record company to record it. and then they end up blowing half of it on drugs and alcohol and food. So they weren't really left with a lot of money. But I do think that part of its charm is the rawness of it. In some ways, it kind of reminds me of Metallica's Kill 'Em All kind of sound. If it was just slightly more edgier and more off the cuff, kind of. You know, I do think it is it's a pretty solid debut. You know, I wouldn't say it's the best debut album ever. I wouldn't even rank it. I wouldn't even rank it like high on like their top albums or anything like that. But I do think it is pretty solid. I think the opening track, "Last Rites" / "Love to Death" is pretty cool, and it's sort of like their kind of a love song, kind of. It has a really cool intro with piano and stuff. Like it kind of does sound like something you'd hear in like, you know, The Exorcist or something like that. You know, it just has that sound, at least in the intro. And the title track is really good as well. And Rattlehead, which is pretty much the creation of the Vic Rattlehead mascot, which I think is one of the most unique things about Megadeth, much like bands like Motorhead and Iron Maiden and stuff like that. They have a mascot that's on most of their albums, Vic Rattlehead, and he's probably the coolest heavy metal mascot. I don't know who would be the coolest. Maybe Eddie, probably because he's been around longer. And because he's appeared on almost all of their albums. I think he's appeared on all of their albums, actually. But, yeah, so... Anyway, we have... Rattlehead is pretty good. And Mechanics, which is basically like the original The Four Horsemen, because it was like an early version. Like, Dave Mustaine obviously was in Metallica for the very early years. Got kicked out before recording their debut album. He wrote a bunch of songs. This was one of them, and Mechanics bears very much resemblance to the Four Horsemen, but it's about something completely different. As far as which one I like better, I like the Four Horsemen better. I just like the lyrics a bit more. I like its energy a lot, but I think this one is pretty cool too. It's a bit more raw, and it's a lot faster than the Four Horsemen. But one of the most interesting songs on the album, if not the most interesting, is the cover of "These Boots Are Made for Walking." And it's just called "These Boots" on here. And it's interesting not on the original album, but on the remastered version of the album. And it is just one of the most unintentionally funniest things ever. Well, it's also kind of frustrating at the same time because it is just censored all the crap. You know, like, I don't know how to describe it. You just have to listen to it in order to really experience, this butchering of a song. Like, they bleep out a lot of stuff. Like, it probably takes up like half of the song, It's like, da 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 da, beep! Like, it is that for pretty much half the song. And it's just like, it's really annoying. Because honestly, like, the original version of the song, Megadeth's original version that was released on the original album, like, it's not even that bad. Like, Mustaine, he changed the lyrics a lot. But like, he never drops, like, the F-bomb or anything like that. He never drops anything like that. It's like, trying to think of what the lyrics are, what the change lyrics are. One of these boots are gonna stomp all over you. Like, it's not even that bad. It's like that. It's not bad. Maybe violent, but it's not that bad. But because they were threatened with a lawsuit over it due to the original writer, they changed it. I mean, they had to censor it, and I think it was left off the album for a lot of years before they just put it back and they had to censor it. But honestly, I would much rather them just leave it off the album, because the bleeps really do get annoying and old after a while. But I don't know. I think part of its charm, on the remastered censored song is the fact that it is just censored. That it is really just butchered with all the bleeping. So, I don't know. But yeah, overall, Killing Is My Business and Business Is Good. It's a solid start for Megadeth. Probably not their best album by any means, but if you're curious how they got their start, it's a pretty cool start. There's a lot of good, cool songs on here. If you just want to check it out for curiosity's sake, I'd say check it out. It's about 30 minutes. It doesn't really take that long to listen to. I mean, it's a pretty cool debut. And so now we get to their second album, Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? And this came out roughly a year after Killing Is My Business. Killing Is My Business came out in 85. This one came out in 86. And I would probably say this is objectionably their best album. Pretty much every single song on here is amazing. There's no filler on this album, There's nothing like that. The lyrics are great. It's just really good. Wake Up Dead is a great kind of, opening track. The Conjuring is a great kind of black magic song. Peace Sells, of course, is great. Good Morning Black Friday is awesome. And, one of the things I first think of when I think of this album, I always think of Superstition when I think of this album. I always think of Black Magic when I think of this album. This might as well have been called Black Magic the Album, because that's really what it is. Like, I always think of that when I think of this album. It just has that theme, that like underlying theme going through it, and it's just really cool. And the lineup, as always, just awesome on here. Really makes the album. I think The Conjuring might be my favorite one on here. Just really good. Like the intro is fine, but the middle and the end is where it really gets kicking. And Devil's Island is good. Good Morning Black Friday is awesome, like I said. And I actually listen to this song every single Black Friday every year. The day after Thanksgiving, of course, is Black Friday, and every Black Friday I listen to this song. This is the Black Friday song. It could probably be like the actual Friday song, official Friday song. I don't know. But and there's also a really cool cover of I Ain't Superstitious. So yeah, not much to say about it. Overall, this album is really good. Probably their best. I mean, I don't know. Megadeth has a lot of great albums. But this was really the one that was really able to solidify them as one of thrash metal's big four, I'd say. So yeah, I would probably start with this album and work my way forward if I was a first-time Megadeth listener. Because this album is just really good. And so now we move on to So Far, So Good, So What? And this was released in 88. And, this is actually really good. I was sort of debating with myself over whether this was better than Peace Sells, but I'm really not sure. Like, I would probably say they're like on par with both of them, with that Peace Sells. I don't know. It's just really good. The opening track begins with an instrumental called Into the Lungs of Hell, and that really just sets you up for what the album is going to be like. And Set the World Afire is a really good one, very fast, kind of song. And then we have a cover of Anarchy in the UK, which is pretty cool. And, I've always sort of struggled to kind of figure out which one is the best best one out of all of them, because obviously the Sex Pistols original was really cool, but then Motley Crue also did a cover a couple years later in '91, and that's awesome. So I really don't know. I'd probably lean more towards Motley Crue's, because they really just do a lot of stuff there. It's a really raw, pounding song, especially for Motley Crue. So yeah, I don't know. It's a good song, nevertheless. And Mary Jane's a really cool song as well. And My Darkest Hour, of course, is awesome. A cool little ballad. And Liar is a very interesting song, because it's basically a rant at Megadeth's former guitarist, Chris Poland. And that's something I need to mention here, because this was the first Megadeth album to be featured in mainly sort of a new lineup, because both the drummer and guitarist were fired beforehand, before this album, so we have a sort of a half of a new lineup. And so it's an interesting kind of change. Right? I think it still does a great job here. But Liar is basically a rant at Chris Poland, because Mustaine was pissed off because he accuses him of so much stuff here. And if you ever heard a song, you never would have thought that Chris Poland would ever return or be on good terms with Mustaine. And there's actually going to be an album later on where something pretty interesting happens. But that's much later on, but it's just a really scathing song. Hook and Mouth, which ends the album, is really good as well. It's a good album closer. So yeah, so far so good. So what? It's a really good album. It's probably on par with Peace Sells, but Who's Buying? Sort of has a similar sound to it, but at the same time, actually sort of works towards building that kind of. It's sort of a precursor to Rust in Peace when you really think about it, because a lot of the sound on here, it does remind me of that kind of Rust in Peace kind of production. And speaking of which, that brings us to our next album, Rust in Peace. And this is a Megadeth album that I actually own. I just really love it that much. And this was the one. This was actually the first album with a brand new lineup, kind of. Another new lineup, but this was the first one in which I think this is basically Megadeth's, in my opinion, their classic lineup. Because you got Dave Mustaine front and center. Then you got, trying to think of his name, David Elfison on bass. You got Marty Friedman on guitar. And you got Nick Menza on drums. The very best Megadeth lineup, without a doubt. And this was really the first album that sort of brought them into the mainstream. Peace Sells, they were really kind of well known in the underground thrash metal scene and stuff like that. But it probably wasn't really until this album and Countdown to Extinction where they were really truly known, in the mainstream and stuff like that. And again, much like Peace Sells, and maybe even So Far So Good, So What. So, but I guess really what I'm trying to say is that this album doesn't really have much filler, Peace Sells, basically. Because So Far So Good, So What does sort of have a couple of filler kind of songs. But this one, pretty much every song on here is great. Holy War's The Punishment Due, which begins the album just to let you know that Megadeth is here, sets up the tone of the album amazingly. Then you got Hang Our 18, like I said, first Megadeth song I ever heard. Five Magics is cool as well. Poison Was the Cure, great fast-paced song. Just has a really cool intro with the bass. Lucretia is pretty cool as well. Tornado of Souls, Dawn Patrol, which you can actually hear an instrumental of it. and at the very beginning of the Hangar 18 video. And then you got the title track, Rest in Peace Polaris, and that's really cool as well. So overall, not much to say about this album, but this album really cool. You know what? It definitely ranks up there as one of my favorite Megadeth albums. Just really cool. This is like, when it comes to thrash metal, it is definitely the best of the best. And then we get to Countdown to Extinction. And yeah, this was the one with a lot of good songs, but at the same time, you can sort of tell that Megadeth is kind of, I don't want to say like dumbing down their sound necessarily, but it's a bit more simple and more relaxed than their other stuff. I mean, like, even the heaviest of songs on here are kind of simple. A lot of them are pretty mid-tempo and stuff like that. So they're all kind of like simplifying their sound a little bit. But at the same time, it probably has some of their best songs on here. Skin on My Teeth is a pretty solid way to open up the album, especially with that drum fill. It's really good. Symphony of Destruction, of course. Probably, I guess, their best song, I would say. Maybe their signature song, more or less. But, that's up for debate, really. Foreclosure of a Dream. That's something I would probably say might be their first ballad, more or less. Like, something like In My Darkest Hour could count, kind of, sort of. But this one has probably a softer sound than that. Like, the verses are pretty soft, kind of melancholy a little bit, but then the chorus really kicks in. It really kicks it up a notch. And Sweat and Bullets, a really good song, sort of like, trying to think what it's about, trying to look for the right term, I guess. Like, schizophrenia, I think that's what you could say. Or multiple personality or something like that. Something like that. Correct me if I'm wrong. But I think that's what the term is. But, yeah, a really good song with an even better video. Like, that is an awesome video. And then the title track is about animal... it's sort of like about animals and PETA stuff and stuff like that. And a lot of people think that it's about James Hetfield of Metallica because he's an avid hunter, and it's basically about hunting animals and stuff like that. So it's a pretty interesting album, pretty interesting song. And then one of my personal favorite Megadeth songs, a song that's not really very well known. It was never really released as a single, but I still really like. Ashes in Your Mouth, really heavy, very fast-paced song. I would probably say the best song on the album. Just really good. I really like it. The guitar solo in the middle is really awesome, and the drum outro is just amazing. So, Countdown to Extinction, it is sort of the beginning of Megadeth trying to sound a bit more radio friendly, trying to get a little bit more commercial, but at the same time, it's still a pretty solid album, because you got your big hits like Symphony of Destruction and Sweat and Bullets and stuff like that, but you also have a lot of filler on here as well. So I do think it is a solid album. And then we have Euthanasia. And this was released in 94. Countdown to Extinction was released in 92. So this was released in 94. And again, much like Countdown to Extinction, it's sort of continuing that evolution into become a bit more of a standard heavy metal band, or dare I say even a bit of a hard rock band. And, this is probably my least favorite Megadeth album. And if it's not my least favorite, then it's up there as one of the weakest. And like, it's not even awful by any means, but it's just so forgettable. And I don't know. I don't remember too much about it, honestly. Like, I remember a couple of songs about it from a To Monde and Victory, but other than that, I don't really remember this album much. It's just really forgettable. It's sort of like the first real, like, dud, in Megadeth's discography. And again, not horrible, but it's not necessarily memorable either. It just seems like a lot of filler. It really does seem like it's trying to capitalize on the success of Countdown to Extinction. And I think Countdown to Extinction, I think it did pretty well in its first week. I think it got like number 2 on the Billboard charts. So I remember an interview in which Mustaine said that with Euthanasia, he wanted to get a number 1 album. And honestly, that's what it sounds like. Like, a Two-Way Mon, it definitely sounds like that kind of heavy metal ballad, And like, it's okay. Like, it's nothing great, The Killing Road is pretty interesting as well. Train of Consequences is cool. And Victory is probably the most interesting song because it references all kinds of Megadeth songs. I couldn't even begin to describe how many things it references. It references Killing Is My Business. I think it has the laugh from Lucretia from Rust in Peace on it. And there's like a million more references. So it's a pretty cool song in that regard. But overall, it's probably the weakest album in Megadeth's discography. I don't know. It's definitely up there as one of their weakest. I didn't care much for this album. And then we have Cryptic Right. And this one is actually pretty good. This was definitely a step up from Euthanasia. I mean, again, it still has that kind of... They're still continuing with trying to get some radio airplay, trying to get some commercial success. But at the same time, it really has some great songs on it. Just a lot of great rock songs. I think stuff like Trust is really cool. It has that really cool drum intro. And we have Almost Honest, To Use the Man. And I think the first 3 songs on the album, the first few songs, are really good. I think in the middle, it sort of tapers off a little bit. But really by the time She Wolf begins, I think it really starts to pick up. So again, really not that much to say about this album. It's probably it's probably just as forgettable as Euthanasia. But at the same time, there's a few more songs that I remember on here. Like, I at least remember She Wolf and Trust as well as Almost Honest. Whereas on Euthanasia, I didn't really remember that much about it. So I would dare say it's kind of an underrated album in some ways. But at the same time, yeah, it's not really amazing or anything like that. And so now we move on to Risk. Oh man, this is going to be a little bit controversial. Risk it's considered by a lot of people to be Megadeth's worst album. I can see where they're coming from, but at the same time, I don't actually think it's as bad as people think it is. I mean, it's not a great album by any means. Because Megadeth... well, first of all, Megadeth had a lineup change for the first time since 1990, really. This was the first lineup change in a long time. Nick Menzo left the band, so Jimmy DeGrasso became the drummer. And I think it still does fine. It's not quite the same, but I do think they do fine, with this slightly new lineup. And it's also it's sort of the culmination of what they've been doing in the 90s. Sort of trying to get that sort of radio airplay. Now they're trying to do this kind of alternative rock, and it's just all these different sounds. And some of them work, some of them don't. For me, it's really is just like a mixed bag. Like, I think the album intro, Insomnia, that's actually one of my favorite Megadeth songs, honestly. I do think it's really cool. I do like the Middle Eastern kind of tones on the song, that kind of Middle Eastern feel. I really like that. I think the music video is pretty interesting as well. It doesn't even feature the band. It just features a cat chasing a mouse. But it's just really cool. I like it. I like the song. It's a cool intro. And then the second track is Prince of Darkness, which I think probably goes on a bit longer than it needs to. But I think it's pretty cool. It really does have that kind of atmospheric kind of sound, especially with the first 2 minutes. And then we have Crush 'Em, which is preceded by a interlude called Enter the Arena. And this was like, I believe this was the lead single for the album. And it's not really very good. Like, Megadeth were hoping that it was going to be like this brand new sports anthem and stuff like that. But, I don't see how that could have worked. Like, it's sort of like that kind of alternative rock sound, but then it also kind of has a disco beat going for it. It's just a really weird song. And on top of that, if they wanted it to be like a sports song, I think they kind of failed there. Because I don't really think it has like the energy that a sports song does. I don't know. I just don't see it. And this was also Goldberg's theme song in WCW for a very brief time. And when I say a very brief time, I mean really brief. Like, he only used this for like a month, maybe less than a month. Then, like, he went back to his original theme, which is definitely better. Because I think even at that time, WCW was smart enough to realize that the song was complete crap. But, yeah, so Breadline, it's okay. The Doctor is Calling, that's actually sort of an underrated song. The intro, in some ways, it actually kind of reminds me of One from Metallica a little bit. I don't know. I always got that sort of feel. It always felt a little bit like the One riff. One opening riff. But that's just me. And Wanderlust is pretty cool. And there's also 2 songs which end the album called Time the Beginning and Time the End. And Time to Begin is pretty cool. It's sort of like this wistful kind of like, sort of like this kind of melancholy kind of song. Like sort of acoustic stuff like that. And then Time to End is something that's really heavy. And these 2 are really the only songs on the album that do sort of feel like Megadeth songs. So overall, Risk, I don't think it's as bad as its reputation would suggest. But at the same time, yeah, it's not really that good. And it was really a bit of a mistake for Megadeth. And now we move on to The World Needs a Hero. This was in 2001. Risk was in 99. And then Cryptic Right was in 97. Like, I really need to start mentioning the years. I keep forgetting, but yeah. So The World Needs a Hero, 2001. I know a lot of people don't seem to like this album a lot. And I don't know why. Because, like, everywhere I read, much like Slayer's God Hates Us All and stuff like that, for some reason, people just hate this album. Or at least just dislike it. Personally, I don't get why that is. I really like this album. It's finally a return to a heavier, to their heavier sound. Stuff like, I could see some of these songs being like on Rust in Peace or something like that. You know what I mean? This was also the first album to not feature Marty Friedman since So Far So Good, So What. He joined on Rust in Peace. He left after Risk. And I think what was interesting about that was that Marty Friedman, by the time of Risk, he was sort of getting tired of playing heavy metal. He kind of wanted to do other things. And that's actually one of the reasons that they made Risk, was so that they could keep him at bay, at least for a little while longer. But then he decided to go ahead and resign from the band. And I think he lives in Japan right now. I think he's doing like J-pop kind of music. I think he's doing stuff that's completely different from what he's done before. Or at least something slightly different. And his solo stuff is actually pretty interesting. And then on guitar, we had Al Pitrelli, who I don't really know him that well, but he's done stuff with Trans-Siberian Orchestra, Alice Cooper. So he's been around. So he's been around a while. And the songs here, again, like I said, it's a return to the kind of thrash metal roots, like there's So Far So Good So What stuff and Rust in Peace kind of sound. Disconnect is a really cool opening track. The World Needs a Hero. The title track is awesome as well. Burning Bridges is good. Recipe for Hate, Warhorse. That's actually one of my favorite songs off this album, if not my favorite. Like, I really do like this song. It's just a really cool song. Like, the intro is just like blistering, like it's just a really good intro. And Dread and the Fugitive Mind is a pretty cool song as well, and that was actually a song that was released about a year earlier in 2001. A compilation album called Capital Punishment, the Megadeth years, which was a compilation of everything that they did for Capitol Records. And this was one of two songs that was on there, the other being Kill the King, which is one of my favorite Megadeth songs. Kill the King is awesome. But Silent Scorn is an instrumental, and it's a really cool and a very unique song. It doesn't really sound like anything Megadeth's done before. Like, in some ways, I can kind of see it being on Risk, but at the same time, it's just really cool. It's just like this acoustic guitar, just going, and then we have like an electric guitar joins in, does a great solo. Then we actually have like a trumpet on it, and so that's pretty interesting. And we have a sequel to Return to Hangar, a sequel to Hangar 18 called Return to Hangar. And I know a lot of people thought this was sort of a cheap kind of thing to do, and it wasn't as good as the original. But personally, I think it's fine. I don't think it was as good as it could have been, but at the same time, I do really like it. And when a really interesting song clocks in at 9 minutes, and I think it does kind of go on a bit too long, but I do think it is pretty cool. So overall, I do think that The World Needs a Hero is a bit underrated. I don't think it gets as much love as it should. It's definitely a welcome return from what they've been doing before. I think it's probably, it's a lot better than what they were doing, So it's a nice change. It's a nice welcome back in some ways. Then we move on to 2004, where we get The System Has Failed. And what's interesting about this particular album is that there's a lot of interesting things going on behind the scenes. In 2002, about a year after The World Needs a Hero, Megadeth actually broke up because Dave Mustaine suffered an arm injury, which rendered him unable to play guitar. So the band broke up for a little bit. And then when he got better, this was originally supposed to be a solo album, but the record company made him put the Megadeth name on it. But, yeah, I do think this is a really good album. Again, much like The World Needs a Hero, I do think this is really good. I actually do think it's better than The World Needs a Hero. It's definitely a welcome return to form, and one interesting thing about it is that Chris Poland plays guitar on here. And like I said when I was talking about So Far So Good, So What. Have you ever heard of the song Liar? You never would have expected him to be back in the band or be on good terms with Mustaine, but he plays guitar on here, and it's actually really cool. And this was but other than Chris Poland, this was recorded with a new lineup. David Elverson was supposed to return, but due to money issues, he didn't think he was getting paid enough to be there. Like, he wasn't getting paid like what he was before, So he just declined it a little bit. So he declined. But the new lineup, I think they do a good job. I suppose it's basically session players, but I do think they do a good job of getting the Megadeth sound on here. And honestly, it was supposed to be a Megadeth album, a Dave Mustaine solo album, I guess. But it doesn't really sound like that to me. It still sounds like Megadeth. It does sound like something that the band as a whole would do. And Black Melody Universe is pretty cool. It's a cool opening track. Die Dead Enough is cool. Kick the Chair just has a really blistering opening. Sort of like Recipe for Hate, Warhorse. Just has that really kind of blistering, bombastic opening. And then The Scorpion, which is a really cool song. Again, an underrated Megadeth song. One of my personal favorite Megadeth songs. Just a really good song. It's about the Scorpion and the Frog Fable. And it's just a really cool song. And I Know Jack is a interesting interlude. It's a very brief song, 40 seconds long. Just pretty much an interlude into Back in the Day, which is pretty cool as well. And that's also one of the first Megadeth songs I heard as well, because it was on a show called Duck Dodgers, which was basically a Looney Tunes song. A Looney Tunes show. And it had Daffy Duck and Porky Pig and stuff like that. And it wasn't a very good show, to be honest. Like, there was only like 1-2 good episodes of it. But like, yeah. But and that was really when the Looney Tunes was kind of like falling far. Like, it wasn't as popular as it was before. But anyway, it's a good song. And then Truth Be Told is good as well. Something I'm Not. Both of those are really good. Of Mice and Men is really cool. Shadow of Death is an interesting song. My Kingdom is a good closer. So pretty much almost all the songs on here are amazing. There's a couple of songs that are kind of sort of filler. Like, I would say like the beginning of the album sort of starts off a bit slow. And it really only gains momentum by the time, say, Kick the Chair or The Scorpion starts. So I do think that it is pretty cool. I do think it is a good album. It's a really good album. Highly, highly recommend it. It's a really great thrash metal album. And then we go to 2007 for United Abominations. And this one, I have to admit, this one is a bit of a step down from the previous two. It's not horrible by any means at all. In fact, I would say it's a very solid album. But at the same time, I do think that is a little bit forgettable. It's kind of like they're going through the motions just a little bit. But this was when Megadeth officially reunited, more or less. They became an actual band again, as opposed to something like, a System Has Failed where it's just session players. No, they're an actual band again. And the official lineup is Mustaine, front and center as usual, Glenn Drover on guitar, James Womenzo on bass, and Sean Drover on drums. And they do a good job here. It's definitely a thrash metal album, without a doubt. It's definitely Megadeth, If you want thrash metal, you're going to get it here. Like, Sleepwalker is a pretty interesting opening song that has a cool intro. And Never Walk Alone is a good song, probably one of the best, really. And Gears of War, Blessed Are the Dead. So they even do a new version of A Tout Le Monde, which features Christina Scabia, Lacuna Coil. And I actually like this version better than the original version. I think Christina really adds a lot to this version. I think she fits in really well with Mustaine's vocals. And then You're Dead is really cool, and Burnt Ice is a good closing song. So overall, while I do think it's a slight step down from stuff like The System Has Failed and The World Needs a Hero, I do still think that this is a good album. I just don't think it's a great album. It is sort of forgettable, but I would say it's a good album. And so then we move on to Endgame in 2009. And I'll just go ahead and say this. Endgame honestly might be one of my top favorite Megadeth albums. I really love this album. Because this was really the first Megadeth album that I was really looking forward to. I was aware of Megadeth by this point. I was really looking forward to the album. I was a fan by this point. So I was just really anticipating this album. The first one I was really anticipating. And honestly, it did not disappoint at all. Pretty much every song on here is amazing. It begins with a great instrumental called Dialectic Chaos, which leads into This Day We Fight, which is one of my all-time favorite Megadeth songs. Really good. 44 minutes, a very story-driven song. Really cool. 1320, which is awesome. And it really does feel like a motorcycle song. It feels like that kind of song. You could ride a motorcycle and listen to this, you know what I mean? And Bodies is really cool. Bite the Hand. The hardest part of Letting Go, Sealed with a Kiss. Partly ballad and partly a heavy metal song, so that's pretty cool. And Head Crusher, which was the lead single off the album, really good song, very fast paced, very heavy, very brutal. And The Right to Go Insane is good as well. So again, really not much to say about it, honestly. Just a really good album. It was really the first Megadeth album that I listened to. Like, I heard Megadeth songs here and there and stuff like that, but this was the first album that I listened to all the way through, and I really loved it. Endgame definitely ranks up there with my favorite Megadeth albums. Just a really good one. There's a couple of filler songs here and there, but for the most part, pretty much every song on here is awesome and it rocks. So yeah, I would definitely recommend this one. And then we move on to 13. This was released in 2011. And this is a pretty interesting album as well, because it's a lot darker, it's a lot heavier than stuff like Endgame, or even United Abominations, maybe. Again, I really like this album. I really love it. Again, while not every single song on here hits the mark, I do think that it is really good. And 13, the title is kind of like sort of generic heavy metal title, but at the same time, I do think they do sort of a clever job with it. Like, they stylize it as 13 with 1 and 3 in the title. So I do think that is a clever way of them doing it. And I do think that this has a lot of great songs. Probably some of my favorite Megadeth songs. Sudden Death is a great song as well. This was actually in the 6th Guitar Hero game, Warriors of Rock. And God, that song is so difficult. And I think they intentionally made it to be that way, because, man, this is a difficult song to play on there. And it's even more interesting to listen to. I think Mustaine said that some of the guitar parts in here were some of the hardest guitar parts he's ever written. And it does show, because it is just a blistering song. It's probably the heaviest song Megadeth's ever written, really. And probably going to be number 1, which was more or less the lead single of the album. It's about Al Capone and crime and stuff like that, and it's pretty cool as well. The music video is pretty funny. Whose Life Is It Anyways is really cool. We the People is a great one. That's probably one of my favorite Megadeth songs. Never Dead is pretty cool. New World Order, Fastlane, Wrecker, Deadly Nightshade, and then finally 13, which is the 13th track on here. It's the title track. and it's almost 6 minutes, and it's a very theatrical song. It almost reminds me of something like "In My Darkest Hour" or something like that. You know what I mean? Like it's just like a sort of like a story-driven song, kind of, sort of. And it's just a really cool, atmospheric kind of song. So I really like it. And so that's 13. Again, not really that much to say about it, but it's just really cool. And also, I almost forgot to mention, this was the first album since The World Needs a Hero to feature David Ellefson back in the fold. Because Ellefson, for the longest time, wasn't in the band. When they reunited, he declined. Because he thought that he wasn't getting paid enough. But he ended up coming back they did a 20th anniversary tour of Rust in Peace, where they played the entire album from start to end. And David Ellefson came back for those shows. And I think at first people just thought he was coming back for that particular tour, but as it turned out, he was actually coming back for that. He was coming back in the band full time. So that's real cool. It's really cool to see him back. You know, probably one of the most underrated bass players ever. He's probably just as important to Megadeth's sound as Dave Mustaine is. So it was cool to see him back in the band. This is a really good album. Like as you can kind of tell, Megadeth is just on a roll here. You know, making all kinds of great albums. There is no possible way this could go wrong. And that leads us to Supercollider, released in 2013. And a lot of people hated this album when it came out. And though it was kind of like Risk, like it really did seem like nobody liked this album. And I can see where they're coming from. I really do. And like even I'll say like it's really not the best thing that Megadeth has ever done. It's probably one of their weaker albums. Because again, much like their 90s stuff, they really do simplify their sound. It really does seem like they're trying to go for a simpler kind of sound, more like a hard rock sound, especially on stuff like the title track. But at the same time, much like Risk, there's actually quite a few songs on here that are pretty good. Like, I think Kingmaker is a really good song to start off the album. Burn is pretty good, Built for War. Dance in the Rain, featuring David Draiman of Disturbed. That's a pretty interesting song. Beginning of Sorrow, which is my personal favorite song off the album. The Blackest Crow is a pretty atmospheric kind of song. It's just a pretty cool song. It's just a really interesting song. Sort of, kind of a little bit different from what they usually do. And then we have Cold Sweat, which is a Thin Lizzy cover. And that's a pretty interesting cover as well. It's a pretty cool song. So I wouldn't say the album is god-awful by any means. I do think it's okay. But compared to what Megadeth was doing beforehand, doing all these great albums like Endgame and 13 and The System Has Failed and stuff like that, it's definitely a step down. Like a couple steps down from that, you know. And it's just really forgettable, too. Like, it's not really that good, and it's just forgettable, you know. Like, I don't really remember that much about the album. You know, just the title track, which was the first single, like the lead single off of it, it absolutely sucks. It's just trying to be like this commercial, you know, kind of song, kind of like this radio song, and it really doesn't work at all. Like, the entire album is basically Megadeth trying to combine commercial rock with their thrash metal sound, and it really doesn't work. So, you know, I don't know. It doesn't really work for me, honestly. But, yeah, so Super Collider, not really a good album, honestly. It's okay. It's definitely a step down from what they were doing. It's significantly a weaker album. And so, that leads us to Dystopia. And this was the Megadeth album that has just been released. It just came out today. I was listening to it this morning. I don't know if it's too early to say. I might need to listen to it just a couple more times for it to really sink into me. But my reaction to it after I listened to it for the first time, without a doubt, it's better than Supercollider. It is a lot better than Supercollider. I don't know if it would be as good as 13 or In-Game or any of those other albums, but at the same time, again, this is really my first reaction to it. I've only listened to it once. I'll most likely listen to it several more times because, 13 and In-Game, it's been a few years, It's been several years since those albums came out. And so thus I live with those songs. I've heard those songs for years and years. And so maybe it'll be the same with this one. I might need to listen to it several more times for it to truly stay with me. Well, but I don't think that makes it a forgettable album. I'm not trying to say that. I do think this is a really good album. I think a lot of these songs really have the potential to be amazing songs. And what's interesting about this album as well is because there's another lineup change in Megadeth. They have a new drummer and a new guitarist. They got Chris Adler from Lamb of God on drums. And they have Kiko Loero, I think that's how you say it. I'm not sure. Forgive me if I'm saying it wrong. Kiko Loero from Angra. And I think this lineup change, I think is exact along with the failure, at least critically, of Supercollider. I think this was the shot in the arm, so to speak, that Megadeth really needed. Because on Supercollider, they don't really sound that inspired. On here, they really do sound inspired. And, the sound of this album, it's not real. I can't really pin it down to whether it sounds like this album or that album. You know what I mean? It does sound like its own album. It really does sound kind of like its own album. A dystopian kind of album. Especially in the lyrics, And I do think it has a lot of great songs on here. Like the first three are absolutely amazing. The Threads, Real, and Fatal Illusion, I think, are going to be some of Megadeth's best songs. Like hit songs, or at the very least well known. Bullet to the Brain is really cool. It has a really cool intro. And we have Poison in the Shadows, which clocks in at 6 minutes, and it's pretty cool. Conquer or Die is a good. It's a good instrumental. I really like Megadeth's instrumentals, and this is really cool. It sort of begins kind of melancholy, that kind of melancholy sound where it's kind of like either clean guitar or acoustic guitar, and it sort of starts like that, and the band kicks in, and it's really cool. And The Emperor is good. And the album ends with another cover, like Supercollider. This ends with Foreign Policy, which is Fear cover, and Fear is a punk rock band. And an interesting trivia note about Fear. Fear actually had Flea of the Red Hot Chili Peppers playing bass back in his early days before he joined the Red Hot Chili Peppers. So that's pretty cool. And you can tell that it's definitely a punk song. It definitely is inspired by punk. And like you can sort of tell because Dave Mustaine sort of has like this punkish kind of vibe in his vocals, especially on the chorus. So just a lot of these songs are just really cool. And so overall, Dystopia might be too early to say, but I do think it's a really great album. I don't know if I would say it ranks up there with some of their very best, but I do think it is really good, maybe even great. I know for sure that's a lot better than Supercollider, that's for sure. And I would definitely be listening to this album a lot this year because I really liked it. I really liked this album. So that is all for the Megadeth retrospective. Megadeth, had a lot of great albums, but for every great album they did, they also had a couple of duds as well. But I do think they are a great band. They put out great records one after another. They've had some duds. They've had some road stops every now and then. But I feel like they've made more good albums than bad albums. And I'm really interested to see what they'll be doing in the future. The new album is great. And I'm really looking forward to more Megadeth. And Megadeth is awesome. That's pretty much all I have to say. Megadeth is awesome. So that is all for the Metal Matt podcast. And I will see you all next time.